and we had 2 kids, 2 more. And then in 2008, we came here to New York, where I've been ever since, with one foot in 2 countries, kind of constantly going back to South Africa every day, kind of wishing I was still there, as my family well knows. But yeah, that's where I am right now.
Okay, so now I need you to backtrack. Sorry, somebody just wants a password here. Deny. Should I just deny them the password? Right. Yeah, okay, good. Right. Sorry about that. Couple of passwords. Let's just go right back. What was it like growing up in a house full of academics? And for me, it would have been hell. I'm not academically inclined.
Well, I mean, I think it was actually a huge privilege because, you know, my parents challenged us, and you know, there was a lot of discussion and debate in the house, and I feel very lucky that I did grow up in that kind of environment. Obviously, we were in a protected environment, so there was a lot of armchair discussion about the issues. You know, it was only really when my elder sisters started getting involved in student politics, you know, brushing up with the cops and all of that, I started to realize just how protected we were growing up in apartheid South Africa, that there was a whole other world out there.
What age were you at that point?
So, well, I was actually at varsity, really. It was only when I got to Wits and sort of joined in the whole broader student struggle, you know, that I sort of saw that. But it was really only when I got to the Weekly Mail, and I think I talk about that in my book, where I actually really sort of saw that, you know, the whole country was living in this bizarre way, and where I actually came to grips with that. It was kind of just so theoretical up until that point. I mean, of course, we all grew up with domestic workers and they had their lives elsewhere, but, you know, we didn't really know that much about those lives.
Yeah, they went home and that was it. You didn't. Yeah, I grew up in a home where we didn't question stuff like that. You know, it was just where we grew up.
Right, exactly. I mean, we did, like our domestic worker, we did go and visit her village, and, you know, so we did see that. But, you know, what it was like growing up in the 70s in apartheid South Africa, it just was, you know, our schools were white. I mean, it was just a very bizarrely segregated existence.
Yeah, we used to have we were in Orange Grove, and we used to have an Indian guy who used to come with his green, like, cage type truck once a week to sell veggies, Mr. Chetty. And I kind of like never questioned why he was, you know, he used to like troll in and troll out, but he was a fabulous old guy. You know, he must be dead by now, the poor thing. But it was just nice to think back, like, okay, there was, you know, I think he was probably at that point the only Indian I'd ever come across. So it was very interesting, but he was really, really nice, and he always had nice veggies. Completely beside the point, but anyway. Okay, so now we're studying. Why did you study politics? I mean, you could have been an artist.
Well, the true reason is that I actually didn't want my dad to lecture me, and I don't think he wanted to lecture me either. And he was in the history department. So I thought, well, okay, then, you know, let's try something else. So I went for politics, and I really loved it. So I got very into it, and English was my other major.
Okay, two of my absolutely worst subjects. I hated English.
I don't believe that, because you're a book fundy. I don't think you hate English.
No, I loathed English at school. In fact, from Standard 6 onwards, if they put a Shakespeare, you know, they used to play those Shakespeare tapes, like, I would go to sleep. I mean, turn on Shakespeare, man, snoring at the back of the class. There was no, I mean, to this day, I loathe Shakespeare. And then I had a teacher, an English teacher, Mrs. Blumenthal, I think her name was. She eventually had an affair with one of the guys in my standard and had to leave the school. But anyway, I wrote, and I've never forgotten this because it killed English for me. I wrote Marshmallow Clouds, and she said to me, "There's no such thing." And that was the end of English for me.
Oh, no.
Creative writing essay, and well, that was over.
I know some of our teachers were not prone to creativity, that's for sure, in those days.
But I did love my history teacher, because she would sit cross-legged on the chair and like almost meditate. We used to think she was stoned most of the time, but her history lessons were absolutely phenomenal, and I loved that subject, which is kind of one of the reasons I really enjoyed reading your book, because it's living history, you know, and coming with you living in Yeovil, I mean, I basically grew up in Yeovil my whole life, and I knew exactly where you were when you were talking and what was going on. So it was absolutely fascinating to see Yeovil through your eyes at the same time. Tell us about Yeovil, the Yeovil that you lived in.
Well, it was incredibly exciting because it was sort of this little miracle bohemian bubble, that, you stepped out of this weird segregated suburbia into this sort of heaving, exciting, mixed race, mixed everything kind of jewel, non-stop jewel that was just, bars open every night. The little strip of Rocky Street was kind of where it all happened. And yeah, it was a really exciting place to be in. And as soon as I got there, I was like, I don't want to leave. And I think that was where I stayed for the next 10 years. So some of the characters in my book, I think most people know, they were all there. We were all there, that's sort of where everybody went and partied and talked into the night. And I mean, it was exciting, but it was a very scary time. We were talking about the late 80s, and it was a state of emergency. And so, we'd get tear gassed, we'd go to parties and we'd constantly get tear gassed. And, so there was always this edge in the background. But I think we had a feeling of like we were all in this together, and we were all creating something new, and we could see something new there. We could see it. If only kind of the rest of the country could get it, or at least the government. So that was a fun place to be at that time.
I want to know what parties you were going to that were getting tear gassed, because I never went to one of those.
Quite a few of them. They were terrible. I mean, the music would be loud, and I think it would be because it'd be a sort of mixed race scene, which was just not on, and they would just move in and tear gas. I mean, I can think of about 3 where it actually happened, but I can think of a lot of parties where the cops would just move in and shut down the music, maybe arrest a couple of people for weed. And, it was just this, they had this impunity, which they probably still do in some ways, but there was always this quite fearful kind of shadow, behind all our partying.
Luckily, in this day and age, they can't actually shut you down for weed because it's now legal in South Africa. You can grow for yourself, which is quite exciting. There's none in my vegetable garden, though, just saying.
Well, I think weed was the big pretext because, they knew they could bust us for that, but they really would rather have bust us for just, gathering and having ECC posters in our houses or whatever. I mean, there were student leaders. I was not involved in that way, but I mean, if I think about them, and they got hounded and arrested and followed, and, so they were onto them, and they were onto to their networks.
Yeah, I clearly, look, I think I'm a little bit younger than you, not much, but a little bit younger than you. I was never political, so I didn't hang around in those kind of scenes, but we definitely did Yeovil. And in the run up to the election, I had a coffee shop in Yeovil, and I was going to ask you, did you ever come there?
What was it called?
Lollipops. It was right opposite the recreation center in Raleigh Street, not Rocky Street. So I know in your book that you used to get movies. So I was just wondering if you got movies from Raleigh Video at all.
That was
probably did. No, yeah, I'm sure you did. My mother was known as the bitch of Yeovil. I kid you not.
I think I even maybe do remember that. So it was in Raleigh Street, and that was just further up from.
No, it was right next to the garage. There was a garage. The video shop. Then there was a fruit shop, and then there was Masada. And then there was a hairdresser. Now, when all that changed, I took that last shop, what used to be the hairdresser, and I turned it into Lollipops, which was right opposite the recreation center. So it was amazing because when the election happened, we had a bird's eye view of that queue that snaked like forever around the block. It was just, I mean, I eventually went and voted at Yeovil Boys, I think, because that queue was just never ending. It never went away. In the run up to the elections, there was something like 25 future MPs living in and around Yeovil. Did you cross paths with any of those?
I think I probably did. I think, kind of at that point, everybody lived in Yeovil.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody who was anyone in my eyes lived in Yeovil.
It was a very exciting time. I mean, I remember, when Joe Slovo died, I did the catering for his funeral. And I got a really nice thank you note from Cheryl Carolus. It was lovely gesture. I think I've still got it somewhere. But I mean, it's quite amazing because people like Mac Maharaj and Jay Naidu and whatever, they all used to come and eat at the coffee shop. And it was really, you didn't realize, I think for us, we didn't realize what we were actually living through. So we weren't in the front lines like you guys who were in the townships, getting your, on your hands and knees. Why did you never wear jeans? That was the one thing that struck me in your book, okay? She's always in a white skirt, a floral skirt, looking pretty. And I would have been in jeans. I lived my entire life in jeans.
You know what? I think you'd go to the office and you'd never really know what you're going to be doing that day. So often it would be like, get out. There's stuff happening in whatever, to cause it. Get in the car and go. So I didn't prepare for the action. I didn't have a camo outfit and like knee pads.
I would have thought jeans and boots. Jeans and boots would have been for me like the staple. Okay, I think, mind you, they've been my staple my whole life. So it was just the one thing that when I was reading, I was like, hang on, she's wearing a floral skirt today. We're in a township that's got red soil and blood all over the place, and we were in a white skirt. Those are the things that I was like, hang on a second, girl, what's with you?
I know, it's weird. I hadn't thought of it until now, until you mention it, but it's kind of weird because I always remember what I was wearing in those particular instances that are sort of burnt in my brain. So I can't pretend that I did actually wear jeans.
It's actually quite funny because thinking of that reminded me of a story of my mother. She was at Checkers in Yeovil the one day, and they hit the OK Bazaars. And everybody, I mean, they were shooting and there was like a war going on. And there's my mother, all dressed in white, refusing to get on the ground because she's going to get her outfit dirty. I mean, everybody was like lying flat on the pavement, filthy or whatever. The woman, a few women down, there was a lady with a baby on her back. She got shot dead. And there's my mother who doesn't want to get dirty standing in her white outfit. I mean, so it was a bit like the Wild West, but it was a fabulous Wild West. Your time at the Weekly Mail with Anton Harbour, he did a talk at my shop a few years ago when I still had it. A hell of a nice guy. What was he like as a mentor?
He was great. I think he kind of pushed us. So, he wasn't, like we had to really perform and work very hard. And I think, when he complimented, that he really meant it. He wasn't that lavish with his compliments, but that said, he was very, very supportive. And, as I think I mentioned when I get into the whole bugging saga, he always felt that as an editor, he had your back. He was gonna take whatever knock would come. And he was very protective. And so I did sort of see him as this kind of father figure mentor, because I think he had that air of sort of, just like a very strong and protective presence, and quite combative as well. Not with us necessarily, but just, in the whole regime era that we were kind of negotiating. And that was quite comforting in a way, to know that he wasn't scared. You didn't get a sense that he was scared at all, even though the Weekly Mail was up against a hell of a lot,
What possessed you? I mean, I realize you were a journalist and everything, but what possesses you as a 20-something privileged white young woman from a good background to go into a township that's under fire and try and get the story?
Well, I think it's kind of curiosity to start with, which is, I think, what probably most journalists have, this sort of desire to sort of know what's going on and see what's going on. But I think, when I first was in a township where I saw violence and then came back to the office and saw the police report and saw that the police had completely fabricated what had happened, it created a desire in me to actually get the proper story and tell this proper story and bear witness. And also, you had the sense that people were so relieved that you were there, that you were listening to them, that you could hear them. And I think those things really did drive me. Like I just wanted people, I wanted to bear witness and be able to write what was really going on and give names to those people who were dying or being tortured, you know, because if no one was out there, nobody was even any the wiser. And then the cops would just come with their story of kind of, you know, people were throwing stones and, you know, some people got shot or they had their weapons. And often it was just actually not the case. So I think it was that really drove me. I mean, I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie in those days too. So, you know, there was an excitement element. I probably can't deny that. But I think that was the main thing, was just that I did feel this very strong desire to just actually tell what was really happening.
And what was happening?
Well, so, I mean, obviously there was the stuff that was, you know, the hangover of the 80s where, you know, people were protesting. There was the sort of ungovernability era where, you know, where people were saying, okay, well, let's render these townships ungovernable. They can't crack down on us anymore, and that way we will get change. And of course it was happening, and one could debate that strategy because I think a lot of people got quite brutalized in it. But then again, you know, it was forcing. I mean, it was forcing change in a way. But then, you know, then when Mandela was released, I mean, okay, for whatever reasons, we know there were sanctions and so on that sort of really brought the apartheid government to its knees. But then, you know, what then happened several months later was this absolutely terrible so-called factional violence that flared between Inkatha and the ANC. And I mean, the violence had been happening in KwaZulu and Natal, which was different then. That wasn't KwaZulu Natal as it is now. But it just like went like a lightning rod into the Transvaal townships when suddenly Inkatha started organizing and calling themselves the Freedom Party and organizing among the hostel dwellers. And then, you know, the shit hit the fan. And then it was just like overnight, you know, there was a day in Sebokeng in July when they launched, and then, you know, it was just like massacre after massacre. And that was what was happening. You know, and then, and I was, you know, one of the first of those type of situations that I was in. I saw how bizarre it was that, you know, there was a guy who was killed and they said that he was a white guy and his body disappeared. You know, there were the cops overhead while you're doing absolutely nothing while while Polo Park was going up in flames. And there was this very strong sense that, you know, not only was something weird going down, but also that they were not doing anything. It was almost like they were wanting this to happen, you know, and we all knew that, you know, shack settlements were just the unwanted, blighted spot that, you know, they just wanted to get rid of. You know, you know, the influx control had been relaxed. People were pouring into these settlements, and, you know, they were like this eyesore. And I honestly, you know, it was clear that this violence was actually suiting, you know, whoever it was, the government, it was sections in government, it was the right-wing people who didn't want democracy. So, you know, you could see that this was the backstory, this was the underlying thing, and that's, you know, that's what we at the Weekly Mail were really trying very hard to expose. And other papers like the Vrye Weekblad and, you know, New Nation. There were a lot of papers that were trying to actually really find out what was happening.
How did you balance this cowboy Indian lifestyle of yours, going into a township and then coming and going to your family for a nice, genteel Sunday lunch?
Well, it was, I mean, yeah, it was kind of weird. I suppose it was wonderful to retreat into it because, you know, I mean, it's that weird schizophrenic existence where you're kind of living different realities. And, you know, it was very comforting to be, I mean, I've been so blessed to have such a warm and supportive family, you know, and also it was quite bizarre, it was surreal to be sitting in the comfort of my parents' home where I grew up with this incredible stability and love and support, you know, and having just witnessed, you know, sort of brutality and families getting ripped apart. It was very schizophrenic, and I think I sort of numbed myself quite a bit actually, and just didn't really deal with the sort of dissonance of that.
Did you find, I mean, you spent a lot of time doing that, I mean, many years. Did you find when you got out of it and sort of changed career paths, I mean, you got out of the violence, went into the education side of things, did you feel that you needed to go into therapy?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I did, and it was only after, my whole partnership with Clyde broke up and I became a single mom, and then I came back to Joburg, and then I did actually go into therapy. But I don't even think that it was like that kind of therapy where you go all back to childhood, and I don't really think that I actually dealt with that trauma. I would think I was kind of in denial about that trauma for many years, actually. It was more when when there was sort of crime incidents happening and I saw my responses to crime and like how I would just sort of get very freaked out and realize that there was a whole lot of stuff that I'd never really dealt with.
So did writing the book...
it was coming here where all that stuff came out, actually.
Coming to the States?
Yeah.
Was writing the book quite cathartic for you?
No, definitely. It was very cathartic. It was completely cathartic. I mean, I think it was all mixed up with my grief at leaving South Africa, because I just got here and I felt so out on a limb and homesick, and it just sort of all this stuff just came pouring out. But then I realized what was coming pouring out was kind of a lot of those incidents that I didn't really think I was going to be thinking about, but that's what came out.
How did your parents cope? I mean, my mother would have murdered me. Never mind getting killed in a township. I mean, you had some very close calls when you were in the townships.
Yeah, it's odd. I think they did turn a bit of a blind eye. I think they were proud of what I was doing, and I know that they were proud that I was like on the Weekly Mail and writing and often doing important work, hopefully. But I think they didn't really sort of, and maybe I didn't either describe too much for them. I mean, there were some things in the paper, but I didn't really lay it on. I think I said in my book something like I didn't want them to stop me. I might have wanted them to try more, and I don't blame them for not. I think I probably didn't share a lot with them, and I think it was also it was a bit abstract for them.
Which is probably the best way to go, quite frankly.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
And then you had a hell of an admiration for Chris Hani.
I did.
And you know what I found? I think you weren't around when Mandela got released from jail, were you? And you weren't around when Chris Hani got shot.
No, it was bizarrely enough. Well, when Mandela was released, I was sick in bed, but I think I describe in my book how my sister and I, we dragged ourselves, well, she dragged me, and we went off to Soweto. So we did party there. But when Chris Hani was shot, I was in Kenya. That was just terrible. Yeah. My
father maintained, it was Chris Hani or Mbeki for president. I mean, they were, after Mandela. And my father, to his dying day, maintained that the ANC took out Chris Hani to get them out of the way for Mbeki.
I think that's one of the unfinished business stories of South Africa, of which there are so many. I believe that Hani was taken out, and there's that very good book, Incorruptible. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't read it.
And for whatever reason, I really think that Chris Hani was in the way of a lot of people who had their various nefarious agendas, which probably more about arms dealing and like subterranean kind of money stuff, but and maybe even the Mbeki thing, but it's clear that it wasn't just this right-wing thing. It wasn't. It was much more complicated. There's a lot of unanswered questions about that. yeah, and I mean, there's, Chris Hani thought, I mean, he seemed to know that he was going to die. He seemed to know that, that he was in the way, and that he was going to get taken out. And what did he know? I think, I really do believe that it's a lot more complicated than, just the Darby Lewis thing.
That's a horrible kind of knowledge to have lurking behind in your, at the back of your mind. Somebody's going to kill me at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, oh yeah, exactly. I mean, but there was that instance where the Wallace actually approached him in a hotel. It's just like everybody seemed to know that it was going to happen, and how did it happen? I don't know. It's just very tragic, because I think that I think the country could have looked very different, actually, if Hani had taken over after Mandela.
Yeah, we might not have ended up selling it to the Guptas.
Exactly.
Philippa, you don't mention, I know, I don't want to ruin the book for anybody. I mean, a lot of you, I assume, have read it, being family and friends. And I don't want to ruin the book for anybody who hasn't read it. But after you left Clyde, how did your relationship, how did you end things with him? Was it acrimonious? Because you don't mention that.
Well, that's kind of where my book ends, right? For a long time, it was very difficult. I mean, Clyde, in fairness, he actually wanted to be near his daughter. I moved back to Joburg, and he left Saldanha Bay, and, actually what was a good career track, he left. He said he didn't want to be living far away from his daughter, and he came back to Joburg. And it was, it was acrimonious, but, we settled on a sort of a kind of workable arrangement. He's always been, a very dedicated father to Alice. And so, yeah, it's never been easy. It's not easy, but I think, when you have a child with someone, there's a connection that continues,
He was never living next door, huh? Sorry. Sorry.
That's far away.
Yeah, no, I've just ruined it because I can't remember what my next question was. Like silly. I wanted to ask you, now she goes fumbling in the dark because she can't actually remember what the question was. Tell us a little bit about Clyde. It must have been very difficult at that point in time, having a relationship across the color bar, shall we say, because that's what it would have been termed at the very beginning of your relationship.
Yeah. Well, look, in Yeovil, it was hardly that unusual, but certainly when you ventured out into the broader world, it was unusual. It was very exciting. He came from such a different world. I don't want to talk too much about him. Like, I feel like just my book is exposing him perhaps more than he would choose,
I'm assuming he's changed his name for the...
it's his real name.
Oh, it's his real name, okay.
Yeah, I did actually, he read it and I gave it to him to read, and, I was surprised that he actually said, it's okay, basically what you're saying is true and it happened, and he was kind of okay with it. But, so I don't want to talk too much about him. I can just say, I can talk about that time. I mean, sure, it was really very exciting. And, he had also had a sort of struggle background, actually more than I did. And he was a joller like I was. So, we had a lot of fun, and we had a lot of partying, and it was all very exciting because he was also very politically kind of focused, and we functioned well as a couple in this very heady time in Yeovil. I think he got tired of all my running around and sort of working all the time, because I got very obsessed and sort of very, I was so focused on the whole third force thing, on the Weekly Mail. I mean, it was a stressful job, and we were a small staff, and you had to really work very hard.
I'm going to ask one question about him, and then I'm going to drop him completely.
Okay.
Is he still angry? Is that air of anger and still there?
Um, he's done very well in the new South Africa, financially and so on. I'd say less so, but perhaps that's a part of him. So not entirely not so.
Okay, fine. The third force.
The third force.
Maggie's just asked me to ask you about the third force. It was actually exactly what I wanted to start talking to you about now, because we've got the nitty-gritty out of the way.
Okay.
The third force, which is essentially what your book is about.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. So, the whole notion of the third force really fascinated me. I mean, and it still does, because it's like, was there a third force? Was it just two sides kind of fighting it out, before elections? And there's so many different narratives about it. So, when I really delved into doing some research on the book, it was, you just, there was there's so many different takes. And I know the sort of latest narrative is kind of like, there was no such third force, and the ANC was just very effectively managing to sort of gain huge swathes of the country, before elections. And, I just don't agree with that. I mean, of course, we know there was a third force. I mean, we know that Eugene de Kock basically took a whole lot of weapons from SWAPO in Namibia, gave a whole lot of weapons to Inkatha, that they made weapons and gave to Inkatha. We know that the military trained a hit squad, quite a big hit squad for Buthelezi in the mid-80s, and we know that, it's a basic fact of history, your enemy's enemy is my friend. It's just a fact. And we know that all those border wars were fought. The special forces all came back, and this was their last stand. They weren't going to give up without a fight. And yes, the CCB was uncovered, but then there was this Directorate of Covert Collections, the military's covert unit, which had a massive budget, and we know so little about where that money actually went. It's like when I spoke to Richard Goldstone, as I said in my book, I mean, the tip of the iceberg was uncovered. We know that there was a lot of stuff going down, and we know that, and it wasn't like there was I don't believe there was some grand master plan. I believe it was very messy. And I remember speaking to the late Steve Ellis, who was a political theorist, who did some really good work on the third force. He said, I don't think there was one third force. There were a whole lot of third forces. And I think it's true. And I think a lot of it, was also about, people wanted money. So like some of these cops that got laid off or whatever, or didn't have a place in the coming new South Africa, I mean, they got into the gun running and the drug smuggling, and so I think a lot of it was just actually about feathering their own nests, and the violence was probably some stuff that they were doing on the side. I don't think there was some big grand thing. I think it was like pockets of people doing different things all over the place. And I also think, I mean, we talk about the third force, and, we talk about police culpability and so on. And I think it's not just as someone said to me, and I thought he was so right, it's not just what the police were doing, undercover or whatever, but it's also about what they weren't doing.
Yeah.
It's about the people they weren't arresting. It's about, the footprint, the fingerprints that they weren't taking. It's about the violence that they weren't stopping. It was about the way they would withdraw just to allow that violence to take, stuff I witnessed with my own eyes, and once again, the third force is an interesting term because it's like this notion of deniable, that it's something you can deny. So when the cops pull out and there's a big battle raging, well, what proof do you have? It's like this whole notion of deniability, which fascinates me.
What do you think went on in the background in terms of nobody being prosecuted for anything? I mean, nobody's ever been, come to book for the people that got killed in all the townships.
I mean, I think, I think Eugene de Kock took the fall, essentially. And I think that he must have made some kind of deal, maybe to keep his wife and kids safe, because apparently he had a lot of information, and, it must have had a lot of stuff on the bigger wigs. And I don't know, I mean, I pose that question in my book. It's very odd how they just shut down the investigations. I mean, the Truth Commission didn't really investigate the 90s in any real way. And, we can say, oh, well, they were on a new ship, they had to run the country, that this wasn't the space for prosecutions and for, there was nearly a coup. I mean, let's face it, the country was on a knife edge. So, they couldn't just, perhaps it was just all too much. And they also had blood on their hands, the ANC. And certainly there wasn't the will to continue prosecuting. But I do believe that there's strange stuff and that deals were struck, because I think that it's very clear that there is not a will to prosecute, and that stuff was shut down.
In terms of moving on from the 90s to after the elections to the current situation in South Africa, which for me, there were like lots of parallels. I mean, suddenly we were, how when things change, the more they change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
Suddenly the country gets shut down. We go back into a state of emergency, and you need a pass to go anywhere. Those are the things that are like, hang on a second, we're back where we were pre-90s. And we've got the army back in the township. We've got civilians getting killed, Collins Causa. How do you feel seeing that now?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite weird to see those images. And, people were saying, it's got to be done because of this pandemic. But I just thought that was such sort of overkill and so worrying, because we know that, that police and army are not, they're not equipped to do that sort of thing. It's like not community policing. And I saw big parallels here with the whole Black Lives Matter thing, where people are protesting, and you've got like your riot guys with their rubber bullet guns and everything. And it's scary, because I think that that power balance can very easily just swing, and so I watched that with some concern. It felt like, oh my gosh, these are images of the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, we've gone right back there. It's absolutely frightening. In fact, the president is addressing the nation at 8 p.m. this evening, so it'll be interesting to see what he says, and if everybody should have gone to buy alcohol quickly before the shops are shut down again tomorrow. I don't know.
I mean, I do worry, like when I just look at here, the extent to which the sort of economic fallout has, it's like pushes the country sort of to a bit of a breaking point. And I worry for South Africa, because I just think people are so angry and so disempowered, with the lockdown, but also obviously from before. And I worry, I think it's a very, very dangerous, it's a volatile time,
It's a very volatile time, and I think particularly for Cyril Ramaphosa, I think he's in a very volatile position, because his position has never ever been that stable, given the people that are around him, and he could get shoved out exactly the same way that Mbeki was, and that for us is frightening, because he seems to be a solid kind of person. We actually flew down to Cape Town to meet him about 3 years ago. We had a proposal for him, and we flew down, and he gave us about 10 minutes. He's a very dynamic man to spend time with. It was very interesting. And we also approached Charles Ngakula, because I met him in Yeoville in the very early days. In fact, him and his wife used to come and get movies at at the video shop when he was still the Secretary General of the Communist Party. And there I was, a 23-year-old upstart, not knowing, who I was talking to or whatever. And they were really nice people. They came to get movies. He would come in with his bodyguards. And my father used to go cold every time I opened my mouth because he didn't know what was going to come out of it. And I was talking to Charles the one day, and I said, "What do you do for a living?" He said, "I'm a politician." So I said, "So what do you actually do for a living? How do you get the money in?" And we approached him, funny enough, about a civil defense project to train citizens. And that's actually what we needed right now, was civil defense.
Right.
And this was about not even 2 years ago that we went to see him at his home. And they live in a very modest house well, it's not so modest anymore, but a very nice little house in Bruma. And we went to chat to him about setting up a whole civil defense network, which was going to be partly Russian funded, to train people in event of emergency what to do and how to do it. And I actually sent him a message. I said, "Yeah, now we need it, and we need it now. We needed the public to be able to manage the situation instead of being policed by the army, because you don't want to bring the army in on your own territory. It's the army for deploying outside, not for inside."
No, absolutely. I mean, and that's what caused the furor here when Trump kind of did that outside the White House. It's a bad sign when you're bringing in your army. And I mean, it's not the right kind of policing. So, I mean, I think that's something that society really fails. I mean, it's you're wanting exactly that, a more civilian model, that is humanitarian and that has good relationships with local people, and local people are known, and then they then cooperate. Because if you've got these forces that are coming in from outside and there's suspicion and fear, it can only go badly. So, I mean, it's exactly what we're seeing play out here in the US. And I just wonder why it hasn't been got right, somewhere in the world. Maybe there is a place where, there's really good community policing where people don't actually need to walk around with guns,
First of all, we need a world that's not run by megalomaniacs. I mean, look we've got in Russia, look we've got in Israel, America, England. I mean, a fascinating group of people that are in power all over the world. It's time that women run the world, quite frankly. Up with girl power. Philippa, how long did your book, I mean, looking at the credits at the back, you did a hell of a lot of research. How long did it take you to write?
Well, so when I came here, I did this sort of writing on and off. I picked it up and put it down, and picked it up and put it down. I think my family got a bit tired of me just, there was always this book in the background that I was working on. And, but then suddenly I decided to just basically focus on it completely. And then I really delved into the history, and that thing of just sitting down and doing it properly took basically 2 years.
That's a lot of work. I mean, did you literally sit and read through a shitload of books to get there?
I read a lot of books. I came back to South Africa a lot, which was always great. So I did a lot of interviewing, and I went through the archives, looked at a lot of back copies of the Weekly Mail, and I started getting very kind of pulled into the whole investigative thing because, as we spoke about, there's so much of this unfinished business. And I kept on kind of like just wanting to go further and start digging and digging. And even my epilogue just started to get ridiculously long. And it was kind of like, this is the second book. And I just had to stop. So I feel like there's a whole lot more that I want to keep doing and keep investigating.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you, is there a second book? Because it did feel like, hey, she could come back and write some more about this.
So there's definitely a second book, but I would need to come and do a lot of research in South Africa. Of course, totally impossible right now. And it's unfortunately the period I'm obsessed about is 30 years ago. So a lot of people are either dead or very old or nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, or their memories are like suddenly we don't remember anymore. Sorry, it was too long ago.
Yeah, but there are some stories which I do allude to in the book that, I mean, there's a story that is just such a fantastic story that I don't want to really talk about it now, but I really do want to tell that story properly. So hopefully one day, if it's not too late.
Do you feel that the whites in South Africa have a responsibility to the nation today?
Yeah,
Still?
of course.
In
Of
what
course.
way?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I'm not there and it's easy for me to speak, but I don't know how much, I mean, I think, look, such important conversations have been happening here in the US with this Black Lives Matter. And I know that this kind of thing happened in South Africa with the Truth Commission, and a lot of when white people did come forward and say, okay, we feel we had a role to play, we're sorry for what happened and all of that. And here, this country is very behind. I mean, finally there's that conversation. But I think that, there's been a sort of sense of, well, if you're silent, then you're not. Then in some ways you're actually participating. And I just think I'll actually listen. Jacana had a youth talk the other day with these two young people, and I just, on Youth Day, and I just feel, look, I mean, like I said, it's easy for me to talk from my little perch all the, miles away, but I mean, it just seems to be, we know that wealth hasn't really been redistributed. I think there's a tremendous amount of goodwill in South Africa, like a huge amount among Black people that I sometimes am quite surprised about. And, I don't know, I think there's a lot of fear, and I understand that fear, but I just think that reaching out of the the sort of what remains a bit of a lager, the homes with the high fences and walls. I just think that goodwill is met with such reciprocal goodwill,
Was one of the intentions of your book to give a name to the nameless who died in those years, and faces
Absolutely.
and names? And
I absolutely wanted to do that. And I wish I could have done it better, because I mean, there were my memories and there were the names and there were a few stories. But like I said, as a journalist, you're just moving through people's lives. You basically, you have this window into their lives and their pain, and then you move right out again. And, you don't have a long and ongoing connection with them. So I couldn't do huge justice to that, but I tried, and I did what I hoped was at least something, was to recognize all those people and give names where I could. Yeah.
I would like to, at this point, open up the room to anybody who would like to ask a question. So if you do have a question, won't you please pop it in the chat box, and I will tell Philippa what the question is, or I'll repeat it to everybody, because some people are watching on phones and things, so they can't actually see them. And Philippa doesn't want to wear her glasses right now. So
I don't mind wearing my glasses. I have them right here. If you want me to, I will.
Okay, so throw those questions at us, people. Let's hear. I know, Maggie, you would love to ask Philippa a question, wouldn't you? Okay, well, I'll just carry on chatting until somebody pops up with a question. Why the undeniable?
So undeniable, I mean, I suppose it's kind of obvious that, this is all about deniable forces. And, I do talk about what Eugene de Kock described about deniable forces, where you leave no trace. And I suppose what I really wanted to say was that it is undeniable. There was a third force, or there were third forces. And I think that also, it plays on other themes in the book. There were certain other undeniables. So yeah, that's the title that kind of stuck.
Should investigations into the third force be pursued still?
Absolutely. There is so much stuff that needs to come out, and there are people at the top who were at the top at that time who just got off scot-free, and and I don't believe there's ever real closure. Those people who died in these indiscriminate massacres deserve more than what they got from the Truth Commission. You know, and I always believe in disclosure. I mean, you have to have it. You can't move on without it.
I know in your book there's doubt as to whether FW was, you know, aware of everything that was going on. But how far, your opinion, do you think in the National Party it went up? All the way to the top? Or were there people with different agendas?
I think so. I think there was a certain kind of, like, I mean, you know, we know that FW didn't have total control of the security forces. And so I think he was scared to act against them. But one can also argue that the violence suited the National Party. That, you know, the ANC. I mean, when its followers were frightened and threatened and killed, I don't believe that was good for the party. And people have argued out the other, you know, otherwise. But I believe that it went pretty high up, and you know, it was a case of that perhaps he couldn't rein them in, or he didn't want to. But, you know, he was at that very meeting where it was decided in the mid-80s to basically create essentially a paramilitary force for Inkatha. So, of course, he knew what was going on. That's what
Little is he? I mean, he's not a youngster anymore. Should he still be held accountable?
I mean, that's a difficult question. I think he should. Yes, actually, I think he should. I think it should, you know, it should come out. What he was doing, and it just hasn't. And I think at the time it was a case of averting civil war, and he was essentially given KwaZulu. You know, and the spoils were divided
with a lot of money and a lot of land.
Yeah, but I believe that the truth should come out. I do. I'm not saying he should be hauled off for sort of a Nuremberg style trial, but I think that it must. I mean, I do always believe that, you know, it needs to come out there.
Okay, we've got a question. Do you feel the Goldstone Commission could have done a better job? You had your last conversation with them. How much would it have changed much?
I think it could have done a better job. In the beginning, they were very, you know, sort of. I mean, Goldstone was kind of just, you know, sort of seeming to be doing a job a bit. I mean, the whole commission. They didn't want to rock any boats. He will tell me, he said to me, well, the evidence just wasn't coming in. We didn't have the evidence, you know, so what could we do? And then, as he says, as the evidence started to come in, they started leaning much more heavily on there is a third force, there is some shit going down. But, you know, they had the golden opportunity to, when they raided the Director of COVID Collections office in Pretoria, they had a golden opportunity there were files everywhere of what was actually going down in this covert unit. And they took one little file involving Ferdy Barnard and some little scheme that he was involved with to try and set up ANC officials, whatever, with prostitutes. It was like some weird thing that they had. And he didn't take any other files. And the next minute, the whole place was cleaned out. And then all those files went up in smoke. So that was the golden opportunity that they had to actually bust this thing wide open. And they didn't take it. And he would say, well, you know, he didn't have the jurisdiction to go in and just like take all those files. But I mean, you could argue that, well, actually he did, you know.
Yeah, because we don't know what else was in them.
No, you don't know what was in them. But I think he told me at the time, I think it was Kobe Kutsio, I read somewhere, you know, basically said, do what you have to do, you know. And he could have done a much better job. He could have taken more.
So should we take him to task as well now?
You know, it's also easy in hindsight, you know. It was a very fast-moving environment. The stakes were very high. But for sure, I think they could have done more.
I don't remember you mentioning Zuma in your book, but what are your feelings about Zuma and his role in peacemaking?
So Zuma did play, I think, like a very pivotal role in bringing peace between Inkatha and the ANC. And, at first, I mean, that seemed to be like, something one could really credit him with. But then honestly, when we look at all that has happened afterwards, you just have to wonder. And you have to wonder about what deals were struck. That also led to this thing just really not going further. You honestly have to wonder who was, what apartheid, I don't know, if apartheid agents had compromised which ANC officials and how long ago that happened. And, I mean, it just seems to be that there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot that remains unanswered for why the ANC has sort of squashed so much stuff. And I feel sure that Zuma is somebody who would know a lot about that.
I think he would know a hell of a lot about it. I mean, he was in intelligence for the ANC, so he knows everybody's dirty little secrets. That's probably why nothing happens about anything in this country. Imtiaz is joining us very late in the day. Anybody else got any questions for Philippa? I'm sure she has things that you want. You don't have anything you want to do this afternoon, do you? You wanted to spend the afternoon chatting to us, right?
I think I must have done too much talking.
Why?
Because there's no questions.
I know, but everybody's still in the room. We haven't scared them off yet. How fabulous is that? Tell us about, Philippa, a complete digression. Tell us about life in America.
Okay, that's,
Where are you?
I live in Park Slope in Brooklyn, a lovely little it's a neighborhood. I mean, it's obviously, it's got like, we've got a little patch of deck and garden, so it's not like suburbia at all. And we've got a very noisy hospital across the street. But we've got a huge, beautiful park close by. And I think I live in a lovely place. I'm very lucky. It's been weird at the moment. I mean, there's just been such a lot of protesting right close to us. And, every night we've been going to bed with the sound of helicopters. So, it's been quite tense, actually, in these last couple of weeks. It's a bit quieter now. And then, of course, we've got the pandemic too. So, and as you know, we were the epicenter. So, we had the hospital here has got a big morgue truck. It's still parked outside there, even though
charming.
Even though the deaths have like radically gone down. It's spiking in all other parts of the country. We've got Trump kind of in denial. So it just feels, quite depressing. And actually the governor, Andrew Cuomo, kind of waved his finger at us New Yorkers and said, if you don't stop milling about together, we are going to go back to more lockdown. So we're trying to ease out, but, the shops are still very closed. I mean, people are trading on the corners, like, they're sort of allowing people in slowly, but it just feels very different. It's not the New York.
Like New York,
Manhattan is very boarded up and very quiet.
All of our businesses, barring hair salons and restaurants, are open. I mean, you can get takeaways if you want.
Same here. You can get takeouts, and
I miss like going shopping, and like I'll often take my mom shopping or whatever, and then stopping into a little place to have a cup of coffee, for a little break. And that's the thing that I miss. I don't mind not going to a restaurant. I mean, I cook for a living, so it's not a big deal for me. But just to stop and have a cup of coffee while you just, that's the stuff I miss. And
there's so much social interaction and I mean, there's been this whole flight from New York of people moving to the suburbs because they've like said, well, if I can't have that buzz and go to the museums and do all the stuff that makes New York so great, well, I might as well not be sitting in my tiny little apartment. I might as well get some space and find somewhere cheaper. So there's been a bit of a flight out of the city. I don't know, it's very faddish, I'm sure it will all change when this blooming pandemic is ever going to be behind us.
Yeah, I think we're looking at a long stretch here, quite frankly. I don't think it's actually, it feels very much like living in a dystopian age when you go out and everybody's wearing face masks, and you know, some people are wearing the visors over the face masks. I mean, I had quite an interesting time. I had to go and pick up somebody and drop them at the hospital, and at the entrance of the hospital, the security guards, but everybody's wearing a face mask and a visor, but there's a ghetto blaster booming the most dreadful music. And I'm saying to him, where do I go? And he's going, I'm like, I can't hear you. No, but where must I go? And like, I really, really can't hear you. Please, can you turn the music down? It was quite something.
You know, we've had quite a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of, I think people are just needing connection. So you always get this where someone will ride on their bicycle blaring music, but it's happening a lot more now, where people are just like blaring on their, like with their bike, and there's this loud music, or just playing very loud music in the park, getting a few people to start dancing. And I think I suggested to my old friend Charles Leonard, because you know he used to do this DJ spinning, that as soon as you guys have got summer, you must find a huge place like the Zoo Lake or something, set up some massive speakers, and everyone can dance, because, you know, you can all be distancing outside, but I think people need to find some joy somewhere, you know, in all of this.
That poor Zoo Lake, those people that live in that area, they must hate it. Every time something happens, those street roads get closed and the Zoo Lake is left chaos afterwards. Philippa, I must just tell you that your book was a pleasure to read. It was not like sitting down and reading a textbook. There's a shitload of history in this book. It was a fabulous read. Your writing style is really, really enjoyable. It kind of feels like you're reading a novel. It doesn't feel like you're reading the history of South Africa 30 years ago. And I really, really did enjoy it. I mean, it literally took me 3 nights to read it. It's your fault I don't sleep at night anymore. You know, like taking drugs at 3 o'clock so I can actually get to sleep. I just want to read you a couple of the comments were here. From Dorothy, no questions, just congratulations. This was such a compelling book. Maggie, I'm not ignoring you, but I'm not talking about Trump. Cynthia, I haven't read your book yet, Philippa, but hope to very soon. This was fascinating. Congratulations, and well hosted, Mandy. Thank you, Cynthia. You can come back. Simone, really looking forward to reading the book. Well done. There you go. There you have it.
Thanks, everyone, for listening in.
Philippa, thank you. Thank you so much. We've been chatting for just over an hour. I think maybe we should let you go. And my hands are absolutely frozen, so I need to go and defrost them. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been absolutely fabulous chatting to you. And I wish you everything of the best with Undeniable. And I absolutely cannot wait to read your next book. Kerry said, fascinating discussion. Thank you. And Sharmini, interesting to look back. Thank you. Don't look back too far, Sharmini. It doesn't get any better. Yeah, so really, really fabulous book, definitely worth reading. And in fact, it's the kind of book you should be a set work in schools, because it gives you a very unbiased account. I didn't feel there was bias there, I must be honest. A very unbiased account of what did go on 30 years ago while the rest of us had our heads in the sand. So yes, definitely worth reading. Fabulous book. It is available as an ebook. So if anybody doesn't want, you know, has hard copy, I have hard copy. I don't read ebooks, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to read Peter James's book as an ebook, but yay. Anyway, now I need to plug for myself. There's a lot of new people in here this evening. Anybody wants to join us in future, these events happen Monday to Saturday, all different things. Tomorrow we're talking to Gus Silber, who has a new book out as well called that's my child making noise, Electric Graffiti. They've been really, really well behaved the whole time. I bought the book on Kindle, can't wait to. I've read it 3 times and loved it. Tony Gottlieb. Wow, Tony, you are a singer. And Khada, I just bought the book on Kindle, can't wait to get stuck in. Fabulous. So if anybody wants to join us, please just stay in touch with me. We've got Gus Silber on tomorrow night. Friday night, we're talking to Francois Hayden about walking the El Camino. And Saturday, we're talking to Lothar Botcher. He's a phenomenal glass artist. And then there's a whole new program for next week. So please join us. Keep staying in touch. Philippa, thank you. Have a fabulous evening. Everybody else, thank you so much. And have a wonderful evening and good night.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.